Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IMAGIN Webinar Series. We are beginning our second season of webinars here in May, and we've concluded first season, and they're all posted with recordings and slide decks up on our IMAGIN website, so make sure to check those out. But today we kick off season two with Tony Bedogne, who will be presenting on ArcGIS Online Web App Builder. Fueled with automatic updates, cemetery mapping updates get even more deadly with hidden pythons. So little scary intro there. A couple of slides I want to just go through for some housekeeping. I want to thank our webinar series sponsors that continue into our season two with Fishbeck, Giffords Webster, and BSNA. Make sure to check those companies out. They're great and dedicated sponsors of IMAGIN, and we thank them for all of their support. And they can help you with your data or GIS needs, so make sure to check them out. You can find links, obviously, online through the IMAGIN site. Upcoming webinars, we have the next one scheduled for May 27th, 2 weeks from today, Connected Nation Michigan, Broadband Mapping Advocacy to Increase Citizen Engagement. That'll be presented by Ashley Hitt of Connected Nation. We are also working on building out our season two, so we've got a couple more presentations about ready to be scheduled, but we have plenty of room. So if you'd like to share some of your work that you've been doing over this past year, we'd love to have you present that. So get in touch with us either via the website or contact any of your IMAGIN board members, and they'll get you in touch with the professional development team who's setting all of these up, and we'll get you on our schedule. Again, we're shooting for approximately every 2 weeks, and we're going to continue right on through the summer if at all possible. So the next one will be a couple of weeks into June. It is the next slot, and we're finalizing who's going to present at that one right now. The session is being recorded. You can send your questions through the questions box, and then either if Tony pauses during his presentation and asks for questions, we'll answer them then, or we'll have time at the end to answer any and all of your questions as best we can. Again, check out the imagine.org website for all of the additional webinar details. Also know that in the month of June, we'll be having our annual membership meeting. We also have open nominations for the board of directors. We have several openings for the board that'll be happening. The election will happen at the end of May and first part of June. And the winners of the election will be announced at the annual meeting. And then we also have open nominations for our awards, Geospatial Achievement, GIS for Everyone, GIS Innovation, and our IMAGIN Scholarship. So make sure to check out all of those. The closing dates on those are within the next week or so. So make sure to check those out. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. I will hand presentation over to Tony.
Can we see this?
Yes, we can see that. Looks good, Tony.
Okay, awesome, excellent. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the presentation today. I want to echo what Tom said about helping us keep this webinar series going throughout the summer. We are excited. I always learn something every Thursday from my fellow IMAGIN team members, and we want to hear about what you're doing, whatever it is. So please present or ask to present. You can submit on the IMAGIN website under the webinar area. There's a geo form you can fill out to submit for an upcoming webinar session if you'd like to do that. Okay, so thank you. So I'm also an IMAGIN board member in addition to being the senior GIS application specialist for the City of Ann Arbor. I have been with the City of Ann Arbor for 4 years now, and I'm coming on my 20th year of being a GIS professional. I am also a GISP, and I teach part-time at the University of Michigan in the Taubman Urban Planning College, and also at Eastern Michigan University in the Geography and Geology program. So what I do for the Ann Arbor is GIS data strategy, everything about business value and planning GIS and how layers and data should be structured to make it efficient. I also do ArcGIS server and portal administration for the city and SDE administration. And what I've become to love a lot is publishing applications on both AGO and portal. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to say the presentation is meant to straddle the technical and high-level business value sides of GIS. So there are going to be some sections where I get rather technical, and if you are not a Python programmer, you can just tune out, but I hope you can stick with this presentation and see the business value and what we've done with the cemetery mapping in the city of Ann Arbor. So let me jump in and just tell you a little bit about the Fairview Cemetery. The Fairview Cemetery's been part of our organization since 1875. There was a cemetery that was renamed to Fairview back in the council meeting in 1898. It's an 8.5 acre cemetery located right near the Huron River. If you're familiar with the city of Ann Arbor and you may have been canoeing or kayaking with your family, it's near the Argo Park, the canoe livery up at Argo. The cemetery is right near there. We'll take a look at some pictures of that in a little bit. So what is the Fairview Cemetery? I took some of this off our city webpage. It's divided into 26 sections. There's the map that's at the front of the cemetery. There are still over 100 full burial sites available, and that's part of why this web mapping application was born, is to visualize where those burials are available. The cemetery is managed as far as administratively by our clerks team. So the clerk's office is the City of Ann Arbor business customer of this application, as they maintain and operate the registry of the cemetery as to who is on what site. So that is what this map is really about. And you also contact the clerk's office if you're interested in purchasing one of the 100 burial sites still available. So what I'm going to do with this presentation today is I'm going to actually jump right into the map, and we're going to take a look at the map together as a team, and we're going to take questions, and then we're going to go back into the design after that. So what is on the web map is the locations of the burials themselves, ability to search for loved ones, and then also showing what sites are for sale. So here is a short URL to the web application. Tom, can we see the web application coming up?
Yes, it is coming up. Yep,
okay,
we can see
all
it.
Right, excellent. So here is the Fairview Cemetery viewer. The idea for the viewer is that it's publicly available, easy to use. There's not a ton of widgets on here. In fact, the legend widget's kind of buried up here in the top. The idea is that the customer wouldn't really even need to use the widget. The concept is that as you zoom a little bit closer, you see more and more detail. The green sites are those 100 sites that are available. And so you're able to click on them and then learn this space identification number. And that's how you can have a communication with the clerk's office about possibly purchasing one of the sites. Other information on it is whether or not there's a memorial. There's some little icons in symbolization of a monument, a monument memorial. And then blue versus gray is if the person buried there is a vet or not. And so you can click on the balloon and learn information about who's buried there. And the other thing is the search by last name or maiden name. So it's pretty interesting. It's dynamic. I'm gonna show how this works later. But for example, I could search the word like a name Ward here. Okay, so I'm finding any derivative of Ward, Howard. But what I'm seeing here is see this person, Alice Lee. So let's go over to that site. Their maiden name was actually Ward, but their married name is Lee. So I was able to find them in that regard. Okay, so it's cross the search. So for example, if I search another one like Yates, like there isn't a person named Yates, but there's this Georgia Vowell who is a maiden name of Yates. So that's kind of how the maiden name function works. So I'm going to stop the presentation right now and ask for questions about the web application. Tom, do you have anything?
No questions have come in yet.
Well, it's supposed to be easy to use. And here, let me show you. See, there's the Argo Park. So the livery is over here, and maybe come out to Ann Arbor this summer and scoot down these cascades with your family. I'll give a quick plug for the Parks and Rec office. This is a really fun thing to do. You don't have to portage your vessel around the Argo Dam. You can kind of scoot through these cascades and then connect up with the river down here. So come visit us. All right, so there is the cemetery. So let me jump back into my presentation, show how the cemetery viewer works.
If you want, Tony, a couple of questions did just come in.
Yeah, sure, let's go.
How long did it take to gather all of the information and organize it? for the
Okay,
cemetery?
well, we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. So actually, this is managed by a third-party application called CIMS, and it's a staff-only application. And what we're doing, you'll see in a few moments, is we're leveraging the information from the commercial platform and exporting it and uploading it into this ArcGIS Online interface for our public customer.
And I think you'll probably deal with this one too. What's the process of getting all of the graves into GIS?
Yeah,
You'll probably hit on
that
that as you go.
that that is basically our presentation today. So I'll show you in just a minute. So
There you go.
I figured I didn't want to have everybody waiting for the map till the end, so I just thought I'd show it at the beginning. So a couple more things to note before I jump into the application. You see the URL up here. So this is an ArcGIS Online application, but it's actually not hosted. Normally, something designed with Web App Builder has a really long gobbledygook of a URL for an ArcGIS Online hosted web application. You'll see this is a little bit cleaner URL because we're actually hosting this locally on a server in Ann Arbor. And I'm going to show you how to do that and why you might want to do that. So this is a local web server that we host, but it's still driven by the ArcGIS Online technology. This is an ArcGIS Online web map. It's the app that's hosted locally. Okay, so that's something of note in here. And then last thing I forgot to highlight here, let me zoom into any old. So when you're running this search, you're actually searching by last name or maiden name, but what it's returning to you in the balloon is the full name up here. So again, I'm going to search that same ward and see how I'm seeing last name comma first. So that's something that's actually managed in the application. Okay, so let me jump over to the presentation again. Back to this. All right, so question that was just asked, how did we used to manage the sites and plots in the City of Ann Arbor clerks team? Well, we still use this application called CIMS, all right, and it's a commercial application that our clerk's office budgets for, and we only have a handful of users. Our clerk management staff logs into this and team members to update the selling information and naming who's associated with the account. How plots work is they're actually assigned to certain account holders, and then there's all the data inside of there about the deed and who's actually buried there, and that's all managed in this commercial application. It's an online application. Okay, so what would happen is very often, folks would contact the clerks team and say, do you have spaces left? We heard there's 100 spaces left. Where are those spaces? And they would have to sit with them at the counter. There was no public visual of that. We had tried making some paper maps at some point to kind of show where those are, but the only way to get that information was to make an appointment with the clerks team, jump into the office and look it up in CIMS. Okay, so this is why the business value of this application was born, to get this information of space availability out to the public. So this is a very overgeneralized process diagram, and we're going to get into a detailed process diagram in a minute. But in IT, we do requirements gathering for all application designs, including map designs. So when we met with the clerks team, they wanted an easy-to-use, accurate map viewer for them and the public. The staff team members, meaning the clerk staff, needed to be able to update the mapping quickly and easily, and they wanted to be able to provide this tool as a resource to public customers to find open sites. And the biggest question here was locate sites for sale. All right, so what we're doing is we're still using CIMS. CIMS is used internally to keep up the data. And what they do now, after they make a significant set of updates, or any update really, they download a zip shape file of the GIS and all the attributes associated with it to a network folder. So this is how that process works inside of CIMS. You click on utilities, you press download cemetery data, and what you get is you get a packed shape file. You get a zip file that has a bunch of shape files, a bunch of CSVs, and a bunch of other stuff all zipped up into it. And so I wrote a quick help guide for the clerk team member that does this. they're in CIMS relatively often, so they know how to do the updates. So now they go to this download cemetery button, and all they have to do is, this is the name of the file that CIMS spits out. I did not make up this name, but it's called this long sequence.zip. They drop this zip file into their local network drive, which is their U drive that they're very familiar with. We made a folder on the U drive called CIMS, and you can see what they do is they just drop that file here. The only thing that's somewhat a little bit tricky on this, if you downloaded multiple copies from the website, Windows Manager will put a 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have to kind of be aware of which copy you have in your downloads folder and make sure the latest and greatest copy gets dropped into this network drive without any suffixes on it. It needs to be spelled exactly like this with the 173.zip. So that's where the clerk ends. Okay, so we made that easy for the staff customer. So everything else to update this map viewer is Pythonic. And so let's talk about that process. So staff drops that downloaded shapefile, zipped up set of shapefiles into that network folder, and let's let the Pythons take over. So this was when I got together with other GIS team members, and we looked at the data structure. So we wanted it to be up to date. We also wanted archival and restoring to happen in case something went bad. We could go back to a period in time and update our map viewer. Obviously, we wanted to be available on the web, and we like to use site metrics on most of our public web viewers so we could see who's using them and when they're using them and how they're using them. So that's some of the data requirements we had. This is our structure. City of Ann Arbor is currently on ArcSDE 10.9, and that's where the data is hosted, and I'll talk about why in a moment. We are hosting this on a standalone ArcGIS 10.81 server. In Ann Arbor, we have a standalone ArcGIS server environment, and we also have a second environment that's ArcGIS Enterprise Portal. So we have both. This application's hosted on the standalone server. We're at 10.81 now. And the data will be mapped using Esri's web app builder. So this is, again, a very simplified process diagram, unpacking the shapefiles, uploading it to SQL, and then hosting it. So let's talk about what actually happens. So this is the deep dive. We're going to unpack the zip file. So the first thing this scripting does is it looks to see if the clerk did one of those downloads or not, checks for the new file. If there's no new file, it quits for the night. So every night it goes and sees if Dina from our team downloaded the shapefile and loaded it in that folder. If they did load it in the folder, then it starts this process. It takes an archive of that daily record, jumps through this. The source data from CIMS is in WMS, Web Mercator. So we reproject most of our data into state plane because that's what we use in the city. So there's projection process. Then there's a lot of extra bloat in the zip file and extra features in the shape files. So we extract out only the features that are needed for the public web viewer you just saw and isolate only what's needed for the web map visual. So that's all happening. So gonna jump into the code. So this is the unpacking process using a zip file library. And so this is how it steps through and looks for the new file. This is where it does the backup. So this is documented for those of you that might want to look at this code or call me later and we can talk about the process. But here's these steps. All right, then it has to do some looping and take these shapes and convert them into a local file geodatabase. So why I'm using a local file geodatabase in this scripting operation, and some of you that do scripting might know that some ArcPy objects cannot happen in memory. As much as I love the in-memory possibility and try to use it wherever I can, a project, often when you're messing around with the projection in Esri's technology, you cannot do that in memory. So you have to actually save it on disk somewhere to do the reprojection effort. That's one of the tools that requires an on-disk process. So I mimic an in-memory process. What I do, this is a tried and true trick that I use all the time that some of you might use or might learn about today, where I, on the fly, create a quick file geodatabase in using this script. I save that on my processing disk. I drop this data in here, and as soon as this script is over, it deletes this file geodatabase. So this is no different than right-clicking in Arc Catalog or Arc Pro and creating a file geodatabase. It's just doing this programmatically. So I make this little processing file geodatabase called myFGDB, okay? And then what I do is I do the projection. It loops through this list and reprojects these shapes. So this is what it looks like when you're done. So here's my ArcGIS Pro window. Here's a zoom in of those monuments. So what I've done is I've essentially created these 5 feature classes from the shapefile. All right, so let me show you how this happens. Again, I use this tried and true technique. Those are up and running on an SDE environment. And what I do is once I locally process those shape files into a projected file geodatabase, I go to our SDE layer and I simply do a truncate and append. So it just refreshes with the newest data from last night. Okay, so now I have all the shapes. I got to get all that customer information together. There is a very, very large customer CSV file in that zip. So everything about the folks that are buried at every site are all in this customer CSV file. So you have to parse through that and make sure it integrates into the GIS. So the reality is there are a lot of fields in there, and 80% of them are not filled out. So there's tons of null values because I think when CIMS designed their data management system, they maybe hope that lots and lots of stuff would get filled out. We fill out what we need to fill out, and so a lot of the information isn't relevant to all burials either. So what we're doing is we're dropping that CSV file into a standalone table in our SDE environment, and I do one quick data cleanup in here where I'm using an arcade calculate field to bundle together the last name and the first name with a comma. So really where the data integration happens is in SQL. While I could have done that programmatically all with Python, it was very complicated. And so what we do is we only keep information that's relevant to the burial on our SDE environment. We drop any PII from the integration, so that's not stored on our local server. This is all secured resources anyway, so only somebody from IT with the right credentials could access it in the first place. But we try to keep that nice and clean. And we had a presentation from Jerry at the City of Traverse City a few weeks ago or a month ago, and it focused on spatial views. So we're also using a spatial view in the City of Ann Arbor. If you don't use a spatial view in your SD environment, get integrated with it. It is one of the coolest and most functional ways to integrate data. So what we have here is we have that burial shape, which is the polygon that outlines the actual site. And then we have this burial customers table. And what you can do is you can build a view inside a SQL Server Management Studio. And as long as you include right here this shape column, which is the polygon shape column, the Esri shape column that we all know and love, in your view, you can render it spatially. And what this allows is you take this view and you register the view with SDE using a geoprocessing tool in ArcMap or ArcPro, and then it walks and acts just like a standard traditional polygon layer. And so this is how we bake that all together. So this is the compiled data. So this burials layer that I have highlighted is that spatial view I just spoke of that has all the goods inside of it. And these other things are the space data is standalone, and the markers and the blocks, and that already had the data we needed for the visualization. So the cartography happens in Pro. So the colors and the symbols and the scale dependencies and the labeling all happens in a traditional ArcGIS Pro project. And then we're sharing this as a web layer on Arc Server 10.1. So I'll show everybody the REST endpoint here. So this is the REST endpoint for our website. So you can go to that burials section and see those are the fields that you're allowed to search from. So we met and decided these were fields that we were okay with presenting on the public web. Then like the space information, there is a status in here. So where you're seeing that as green or gray, that's telling you if it's for sale or not. That's taken care of in this status field. Okay, that's the REST endpoint. So back to the presentation. Okay. All right, so traditional ArcGIS Online web map used for the pop-up design. Everybody on this call has probably done this before. And so in our circumstance, we decided to take care of the labeling and the scale dependencies at Pro and bake that into the service, but you could also tweak that here in your AGOL web map. So nothing too fancy here. We did some aliasing on the pop-up balloon and whatnot. The only other advanced thing is we do have a query in here to only show spaces that are available. So that's what's happening here. And then there's another quick arcade expression in the pop-up balloon. And so in the source data in that customers table, veteran equals T meant they were a vet. Why they use this T, I'm not sure, but that's was in the data they provided me. And so I just am casting that. When you see a T, it's a yes, and it's a blue plot, and otherwise it's a gray plot. So there's that. That's happening at the ArcGIS Online web map level. Okay, so now getting to the back half of the presentation. So again, we're hosting this using Web App Builder's Developers Edition. So I'm going to go to this link. If you haven't used Web App Builder's Developers Edition, here's a link to it. It's actually very easy to get started. There's a really robust install guide on here, and this is a supported technology. So if you're an Esri customer, you can call and they'll help you out with this. So what it allows you to do is it has all the WYSIWYG stuff that the normal Web App Builder, the internet version of Web App Builder has. But what you're doing is you're actually locally creating this application on your C drive, essentially. Esri recommends you install this directly on C. So you're going to need to talk to your IT if you can't do that. But you have to put this right on your C drive, and you compile the web application, and it allows you to export an extensible framework for you to continue to mock up if you need to. So you actually get a compiled bundle of the source code once you create the web app. And so this is kind of what that looks like. Here's how you launch the compiler. You log into your Arc Online account. I'm consuming that public web map like I showed you using the item ID, and there's an edit button. When you get into the edit button, the edit interface is still a WYSIWYG. It looks very much like the web app builder that's online that you know and love. Okay, so here's how I configured that burial search with the double name. So I'm displaying the full name, which was that concatenated last name, comma, first name, but I'm allowing the customers to search on either last name or maiden name. So if they find a return from either of these, the display field, it comes back as full name. Okay, so that's how I configured this search widget. So once you're done with your compiling and configuration, you download the source code. That's how Web App Builder Developers Edition works. So you press this download button, see how it's loading this on my C drive, and what you get is you get a folder of all this bundled up code that is that web app. You can dive into any of these folders and extend. You know, I don't do a ton of extension. I'm going to show you the one extension I'm using on this app, but sometimes I'll go in there and tweak some of the design elements so we can move some stuff around. But really, it's been a really long time since I've tried to add an extra widget into this panel, because the widgets that come with Web App Builder out of the box are so robust nowadays and easy to configure. You don't have to throw a custom widget into this. Okay, so what I do is I update this index HTML by adding a Google Analytics tag to it. So really, that's the only extended customization on this specific web application, is the ability to grab analytics on who's using this app and how they're using the app. As some of you know that use ArcGIS Online, is the web metrics on ArcGIS Online that come with the standard subscription are pretty limited, right? You can kind of say what days folks were looking at your web app, but that's all you get to know. So the Google Analytics tracking, metric tracking is really cool, and I love to use it. And so this is the UA code for the City of Ann Arbor's pub website. So I set this up in here. So again, I showed you how I host that at the beginning. There's our short URL. That's actually a little bit longer than the short URL. And here's some other web applications that I'm currently hosting in the city. And so this is kind of our file structure. So how, you know, you get to it is, see the folder, this is our web environment. This is this folder, GIS, Map Ann Arbor. So these are our public Map Ann Arbor sites. Okay, and then inside of Fairview Cemetery is all that source code that now has that Google Analytic tracker inside of it. So let's look at the metrics. So is the Fairview Cemetery application used every day? It actually is. I mean, it's you know, its highest page views is 20 views, but believe it or not, somebody's on there taking a look at something just about every day. And so this is a year, May to May. And so this is actually this past month, so April 1st to May 1st of this year. So, you know, just a week or so ago. ended, and you know, it's getting some views. You know, so it's 10 views on April 18th almost, or 8 views. So every, you know, this was the only day last month where nobody touched the app. So, you know, it's not our most used app for sure, but it does get used regularly. And then we can dig into some deeper metrics here. So how are people getting to Fairview Cemetery Viewer? They're getting there directly from a2gov.org, which is probably our clerk's webpage, or they're directly hitting that URL somehow, or they're Googling it. Of the 75 page views that happened and 65 of them were unique page views that happened last month, this is what the metrics look like. And then how are they getting there? Chrome, Android, Edge, one person from Firefox. So this is why you add Google Analytics to your site. And there's many other behavioral things you can check on here, but these are just ones I want to show off today. And that's all I have. Questions?
Yeah, so we have a few questions that came in. We'll kind of recap and go back to the first couple too, just to make sure we're answering them. So
okay,
again, that first question is, how long did it take to gather all of the information and organize it?
That's a really good question. So, you know, the requirements that came in from the clerk staff was basically we want to know where the plots for sale are. Okay, so you know, I started as a new user to CIMS and downloaded that bundle of shape files, and it took me longer than I want to admit to find out whether it's for sale or not was hidden inside of the CIMS data structure, right? So me as an analyst, I mean, how did I do it? I had a folder of shape files and I just brought them into my pro project and I just checked them out. What's here, what's not here. I kind of had to get familiar with the data. Nobody else on our entire team knew anything about how the data was structured behind the scenes. So how long did it take me? Probably a whole day of messing around with it, you know, and, you know, so I'm going to say 8 to 10 hours of looking. And ultimately I found out it was in the spaces layer. So once I understood the data structure, then it was easy to design the code. You know, so how long did it take this whole application to be designed with the web app builder component? I'd probably say, you know, under a week, but it wasn't like, you know, if you know anything how your GIS job works, you don't get to focus on everything for an entire week straight. But you know, I'd probably say I put less than 40 person hours into the design of this. And this has been live since the end of 2019. And it got reconfigured in February of 2020, right before the pandemic. Hopefully that answers that person's question.
I think it does to start with. I'm going to add a little bit just because Muskegon has been doing some work on cemetery mapping too. Tony, obviously, then you were handed everything geometrically. All the geography was already built for you in their CIMS program. You didn't have to build anything.
That's right. That's right. So, I mean, I was fortunate in that regard. It was more about how do I get this online to the public and sleuth stuff out of an existing system. So I'm not sure if my clerk team members ended up logging on today or not, but they have a little more history about why we went with CIMS and how that was generated. So
yeah, so I'll expound on that a little bit. I think the hardest part in doing all of this is creating the data when you don't have the data. Yeah. Just like probably any GIS project, but the reality is most cemeteries, good luck finding a map that's actually even accurate from 120 years ago, much less all of the data that's in structure. So the biggest part of that is actually building from old 100-year-old cemetery maps, a cemetery map to start with in a GIS, and then you've got to build your data structure. So there
attributes,
can be all the attributes,
process. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And Tom showed me some of his editors that they're using in the county, and they're pretty neat, you know. And Tom's exactly correct. I mean, there's a couple ways to do this, but drawing out all those small little rectangles takes some time. And many cemeteries are privately owned and owned by churches and owned by small townships. So there's not a lot of folks that have access to resources like we do to keep them up to date. So yes, I agree.
Yeah. One quick tip too, just for those that might be considering this, is don't start on this without checking all your sources. So Muskegon County actually started into the whole cemetery mapping program because I was approached by somebody from the local genealogy organization. They wanted it mapped and they were willing to do the work. So I actually trained a guy on ArcMap, and he's drawing the actual
ArcMap.
maps.
Don't be swearing out here. We don't. Let's say things
Well,
like that.
it's nice and easy, but yeah. So
Mm.
there are some resources because many of us don't have the time to build it. Even if it's built, it can take many hours to clean up the geography and then the
Right.
attribute data. I've got municipalities where literally they have index cards in a
Yeah.
drawer. That's where the burial information is. So
And
depending on
that's
where
where
it
our
comes from,
history was
it can be a
too.
big thing.
Yeah, I didn't really touch too much on the history, but that's how it was done. The clerks team. I mean, CIMS has been around for some period of time, but it's it was meant for an internal only application to jump away from the let's go to a drawer of index cards, right? And
Yeah,
so it's very common.
absolutely.
Yeah, good.
Good. Another question then, did you run into a situation of people buried on top of each other, if you will? So multiple people at different elevations?
So I didn't. I was fortunate enough not to have that. There was some other information where the space, there's the lot and the space, and there was some. There's a part of the data where that's not synced up the way it's supposed to be, and I do a little bit of cleanup that I didn't touch on today. So lots and spaces weren't synced up, but I didn't have two lots on top of each other in my workflow. Because yeah, how do you configure a balloon for that, right? You pop up and what happens, right? So I was fortunate.
Yeah. Muskegon has run into it. We split the space geography wise, east, west, north, south. We don't worry about it too much as long as the cemetery knows there's two burials there. They're typically maintaining that. We, for graphic purposes, split it and make one plot. We call them cemetery plots, or a
Hmm.
space, into two geographies that are not stacked is what we do.
Yeah. Okay. There. I mean, you just got to be creative in some time. It's when you get into the data. How do you
Exactly.
find a way to find that one oddball circumstance? That's one of the hardest things about data science is you got to account for, you know, poor entry, missing entry, or anomalies. If everything was structured, it'd make all of our lives much easier, right? So,
Exactly. Yep. Another question is, you mentioned archival. Are you utilizing ArcGIS archiving, or are you using archiving through your RDBMS?
so first of all, the RDBMS, yes, that has archiving configured on it. What I'm doing with the shape file that is downloaded from the clerks team is that after it gets downloaded and saved in that directory by the team member, right before it gets uploaded into this scripting process, I keep that zip file physically on disk for 90 days. Okay. And so what my archiving in that regard is, what if it happened to me once where the shapefile on CIMS was corrupted for whatever reason, and the whole thing downloaded and then it uploaded and the script finished, but there was no features to be had because the shape itself was corrupt. And I did get an email that there was a problem, but I logged on to the web application, an hour later, and I realized, oh my gosh, I don't have any shapes. So I had the shape from the time that it was updated 2 weeks before that, and I just replaced it, and then CIMS caught up and I was fine. So it's more of like a local archiving. The reality is the changes aren't happening that frequently at the clerks team. So when they do a change and the system updates itself, I get notified via email, and one other person on the GIS team and somebody from the clerks team. So it's like, hey, we did the CIMS update last night. And then usually what I do is I log on to the web app, make sure it's kosher. And if it is, I can delete that archive file. So what's on the RDBMS is more real time. It's like what made it to SDE, but what makes it to SDE could be bad if the nightly update was bad. So it's kind of a double archival in that regard. So I didn't find the need to keep a long-term history of it. So that's our process. That's a really good question.
Okay. Eric asks, have you had any success using Arcade to affect live symbolization in ArcGIS Online? So have you done anything with?
Success? Yeah. So So I don't know what you mean by live symbolization, but I've been trying to, learn the best I can how to navigate the arcade environment to make as robust a symbology based on attribute queries as possible. I was working on a project this week, outside of this one where I was kind of playing with that. My arcade experience is a lot of if then else's. If these two fields are this thing, then show it like this symbol, otherwise do this other thing. There's 5 different scenarios. So that's what I've done with arcade personally. Live symbolization, I'm not sure. Maybe ask the question again or tell us what it is.
Yeah, so we'll see if Eric wants to respond a little further on what he's asking there. So Jacqueline, who I think is from your office in the clerk's office, says, great presentation, Tony. Thanks. We were all watching you.
All right.
And another comment's fantastic work, Tony, from Alex. Question, is there any way to use Web App Builder Developer Edition with AGOL Esri's server? Or do you need to have the files and folder sitting on your own internal web server?
So no, well, to host, you do have to have a hosting location. Okay. So, I know a lot about development, but when I get into web, that's when I have a team of people that help me with that stuff. But so you do have to host these compiled files on a web server. Even if you were to go to GitHub and get a compiled group of source code for any of the Esri web apps that were built on Web App Builder Dev, or like, for example, some of the deprecated story maps, like the Tor story map. Who loves the Tor story map? You can't even do that one anymore. But if you have the old code from GitHub, you can put that somewhere, but you have to have a web server that's out facing to hold that cluster of files in order to pull something like this off with dev. Yep.
Okay. Alex has more of a comment than a question. He spent more than a year remapping all of the grave spaces for the City of Holland's cemeteries. Just finished his own version of a web cemetery viewer as well. So
Cool.
it goes to some of the comments about how long this process can take on mapping them. So
I'm going to put a quick plug in. Tom and I were talking yesterday. We're starting to do tech talks, geo talks with IMAGIN, which is not like Tom and I talk to you and you just sit back and listen. It's meant to be a collaborative environment, and we are going to start one on cemetery mapping. So that's going to be one of our upcoming tech talks, geo roundtables coming up this summer. So look for that, and we want to, all of us that have done this type of thing, we'd love to, the idea is just supposed to be an open, safe space to talk about what you did and what you didn't do. So this is one solution that I'm showing you today. Tom has some others, and Holland, we're looking forward to see yours as well. So look forward to that tech talk coming up here this summer.
Yeah. Jerry asks, how much maintenance do you have keeping the app up and running? Looks like you have it pretty streamlined. So just kind of a question about how much you have to get your hands on it regularly.
We have a job server that has ArcGIS Pro, the latest and greatest Python. I think I got like Python 3.8 on it, so I know it's up to 3.10, but we keep that thing up to date. So there's general server maintenance of our job server. We have 50 different GIS jobs running at different times throughout the week, and they're all very well documented and also error handled in a way where everybody that needs to know gets the emails if things are acting wonky. And so there's myself and another core GIS analyst and a couple other peripheral people that all get notified when stuff goes bad. So luckily, the maintenance is relatively low. I mean, there's the general server maintenance of that job server, but we have an infrastructure team to help with that. So it's a team. I mean, there's 3 or 4 of us that are connected on it. I will say this, once the scripts are up and running and the jobs are happening, we very rarely have to do much with them. It's kind of like within the first month of when they go live, you kind of got to look for unknowns. But I mean, there's stuff that I set up 2.5 years ago that I haven't touched, and I check on the logs every so often, and they just run. So it has to do with your design. You have to have a plan, you have to think ahead, and you have to make sure your users don't put crappy data in your fields and you're good. Funny characters and stuff like that. So you have to limit from problems going on. But if you think ahead, the maintenance is less. Would I say things happen? Not on this job and not on the jobs like the data management jobs that move data around. We don't have a lot of problems. We have more problems on portal or ArcGIS server itself, that you guys probably all deal with, which we host that on a different set of servers. We're architected way where we have basically 3 environments: one for portal, one for standalone ArcGIS server, and then another environment for all these jobs. It's like a job house. So that's how we're structured in Ann Arbor. And then SDE, so a fourth box for SDE.
Helen asks if you could just expound a little bit more about spatial views. I think just kind of high level spatial view.
They are amazing. Google them, learn about them. It's this easy. It's, if you think about a view in a SQL context as table A and table B connected in some way, and now I have a bigger table with lots of information in it. It's that. It's a spatial table and usually a non-spatial table connected in that same way. The only trick is one of the columns in that spatial table is that Esri shape column and their object ID. So you got to have the Esri shape and the Esri object ID in it, and then every other column or can come from multiple other tables or that table, and you just bundle it all together like a regular old view. And once you have that view created on either Oracle or SQL Server Management Studio, you have to register that view with your SDE environment, and there's geoprocessing tools that date all the way back to 10.2 and later. So you can do it with ArcMap, you can do it with ArcPro, and once you register that view, it walks and acts just like any other GIS duck. It has the gray symbology, it looks like a point line or polygon, whatever it is. And now you can't edit those views, they're read only, they're truly views. You can edit all the source data that drives a view. So hopefully that was high level enough. Sorry I jumped into the tech, but it's just a connection of 2 pieces of information with one shape column coming along for the ride. So we should have a geo roundtable on spatial views, I truly believe, too, because there's a lot of power there. Not enough people are using them. So many people are trying to like stuff into columns in a GIS layer. You don't need to do that. You just need to connect them at the RDBMS level, and they're very performant. I mean, I have some spatial views running on parcels in the city that are 40,000 plus records, and they're quick. They're up on all our web viewers without any problem. So, and 40,000 is probably small for some of you, right?
And to Helen, if you have further questions, reach out to us at Imagine off our website. We'll get back in touch with you. And like Tony said, maybe we can set up a roundtable discussion for that in the future too. Jacqueline from Ann Arbor says they do still have the index cards, but that they were fortunate to have staff in Public Works enter all the records and the photographs into their CIMS program back in the day when they converted it all. So
yeah, it would be nice to do photos. It's on like my side radar, but since it wasn't a requirement from Jacqueline and her team, I said, well, okay, good.
Well, and I showed Tony my app yesterday when we were previewing this, and he's like, how'd you do the photo right there? So I showed him that. I think he's going to take that and run real quick. So.
I don't know.
Ryan asks or states the process depends on your CIMS user dropping a zip package in the designated network folder. Could you automate that user action in Python and incorporate that as well in part of the scripting?
So I tried. The punch wasn't worth the push, is the reality. And CIMS, it's a secured service and it's meant to be password protected. So there was that kind of issue with it. And so, yeah, that's a recognizable downfall of the process, but it was one we decided to work around. So could it be done? Sure. Could I pull it off? I wasn't able to pull it off, but I did try.
Eric says he's gotten Arcade to work well with pop-ups, but not in accessing attributes from related tables to determine the symbology in ArcGIS online web maps. So that's
not with related tables, but I have a workaround that I just went live with a week or 2 ago with a team member that's also on this call. I'd love to talk to you about that, Eric. You got to bundle your layers together. That's what you got to do, and then it'll work.
So Eric, maybe get in touch with Tony, and if you need contact information, let us know at the board at Imagine. Alex says he'd love to be part of a roundtable and share what he's done and get feedback. So we'll definitely set that up. Neil asks, does CIMS have an option to store the data locally on a SQL server?
Not that I knew about when I got involved with the project. I kind of came in late stream, so I don't think so. I mean, in fact, if you look at the URL, it's called CIMS Cloud. So I'm pretty sure they went to cloud only. But I'm going to answer, I don't think so.
And like many different GIS implementations, there's, if there's 10 of us in a room talking about how we did cemeteries, we did it 10 different ways with our data too.
Mm-hmm.
So, BSNA, which many of our communities are familiar with, has a
They have one.
cemetery program.
Yep.
I'm actually working with a couple of municipalities where GIS is the repository for all cemetery data. So lots of different ways to actually go about that as well. Got a couple more people that said they'd love to be involved in these roundtable discussions. So we'll get those posted out.
Yeah, I mean,
when
definitely
that
one on
gets scheduled.
cemetery. We want to do one on cemetery specifically, but also one on spatial views as well. So
Yep.
I'd love to help facilitate the spatial view one. So
Yeah. Yep. I
well, I appreciate
think,
lots of questions. Is that it?
yeah, I think that brings us to the end of our questions for today.
Okay. Well, I
So
appreciate the attention. There's a lot of ways to do everything, right? This is just one of the ways I did it. So I hope you learned something about Web App Builder Developers Edition. Um, I first learned about Web App Builder Developer Edition at IMAGIN, one of the years when it was up in Traverse City, not too long ago. I think maybe 2016 or something around that time. I caught it in a session, and once I saw another user do it, I said, well, that doesn't look that hard. And then I went home and schooled myself. So hopefully, if anything, this presentation got you thinking about that or Arcade or desktop Python or spatial views. All of those are tools in your toolkit that are outside of the traditional Esri WYSIWYG stuff that with a little bit of reading and a little bit of teamwork, you can pull it off, I promise you. So I'm learning, I'm forgetting more than I learn every day, but I'm also always trying to learn something new. So
absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Tony, for sharing your
of course.
processes and your experience with cemeteries. We'll keep these discussions going. And I just want to alert everybody again to check out the IMAGIN website and register for the May 27 Connected Nation webinar, and look for emails coming out about future webinars as well as the roundtables. Keep in touch that way, and we'll be getting that communication out. We'll give you just a heads up. We are doing some website maintenance over the next few days, so there might be a couple of days of outage on the IMAGIN website as we move domain registrars and things like that. But we should be back up first part of next week, I hope. And so thank you again, Tony, for your presentation, and thank you all for attending, and we look forward to seeing you soon. And with that, we'll wrap up for the day.
Thanks, everyone.